I'm Katrina Perry. You're very welcome. There's been an outpouring of grief around the world for Alexey Navalny, Russia's most prominent opposition leader, after Russian officials announced that the 47-year-old died in prison. Known as President Vladimir Putin's most outspoken critic, Mr. Navalny was recognized internationally for risking his own life to stand up to Mr. Putin's regime. It's still unclear how Mr. Navalny died. On Friday, people came together at vigils around the world, laying flowers and lighting candles next to photos of Navalny. This included gatherings in the former Soviet bloc, like this one in Georgia, as well as Armenia and Lithuania. Hundreds gathered here in Washington outside the Russian embassy to pay respects to Navalny and speak out against President Putin. Many world leaders on Friday condemned Mr. Putin for Navalny's death. The British government said it has summoned representatives of the Russian embassy to make clear that it holds Russian authorities fully responsible. He faced what many international observers say were unfounded, politically motivated charges meant to suppress opposition in Russia. Mr. Navalny always defended his innocence. He was just 47 years old. The Kremlin denies it played any part in Navalny's death. He spent his final days in a Russian penal colony, where prison officials say he died after going for a walk. As the BBC's Russia editor Steve Rosenberg reports, Navalny was seen in good spirits just one day ago.
Smiling, cracking jokes. This was Alexey Navalny yesterday, as he gave testimony by video link from prison. Even court officials managed to smile. But today, Russia's prison service said that Mr. Navalny was dead. It claimed that inside this penal colony, he'd fallen unconscious and that medical teams couldn't save him. Russian TV rarely mentions Alexey Navalny. It read out the prison service statement about his death and moved on to other news. He was Vladimir Putin's most vocal critic, a protest leader, an anti-corruption campaigner who'd long clashed with the Kremlin. I remember this 6 years ago.
Alexey Navalny is Russia's most prominent opposition figure and President Putin's most vocal critic. He's been barred from running in the presidential election. He's now being arrested by police.
In 2020, in Siberia, he'd been poisoned with a nerve agent and airlifted to Germany for life-saving treatment. He accused the Kremlin of trying to assassinate him. But as a politician, he felt he couldn't stay away from Russia. When he returned the following year, he was arrested on arrival. He'd been in prison ever since, his friends and family fearing for his safety. Just hours after Alexey Navalny was reported dead, his wife Yulia made a dramatic appearance at the Munich Security Conference. She couldn't confirm his death, but
if it's true, I want Putin and his whole entourage, his friends and his government to know that they will be held responsible for everything they've done to our country, to my family and to my husband. And this day will come very soon.
And once she'd finished speaking, from the hall, a standing ovation. Back in Russia, President Putin was meeting industrial workers. He made no mention of Alexey Navalny. He knew that by taking on the authorities, he was taking a risk.
My message for the situation when I'm killed is very simple: not give up.
Not all Russians supported Alexey Navalny, but in Moscow and in other Russian towns, people came out to remember him. In a country where dissent has been silenced, for many here, just doing this was an act of courage. So at this makeshift shrine, people have been putting down portraits of Alexey Navalny. They've been laying roses and carnations and lighting candles, as you can see. And here at the end, there's a sign which says, "We won't forget and we won't forgive." There's a palpable sense of disbelief.
I was see the news on my phone, and first my reaction was like, it's just a joke, it can be real. But then the news was coming more and more and more, and I was crying like for 1 hour.
What was your reaction when you heard the news about his death?
I was with my friends. I was broken. I really thought that it couldn't happen. Like, never.
That's the phrase I've heard so often from Russians in recent times. We never thought it could happen. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Our correspondent Will Vernon spent many years reporting on Russia and on Alexey Navalny, and he told us about the kind of man that he was.
Alexey Navalny was a very engaging man. He was an excellent public speaker. His speeches were really entertaining, actually, to listen to. He was very funny, right? And we saw he didn't lose his sense of humour despite all the kind of trials, literally trials and tribulations that were thrown at him. He was very courageous. He was a brave man, right? And this is something we've heard quite a lot today in the various tributes that have been paid to him, how brave he was. And that decision to return to Russia in 2021, of course, was an incredibly courageous thing to do. He knew that he almost certainly would be arrested, but he also was very good at persuading people. And I remember actually a few years ago when we were on the campaign trail with Mr. Navalny, we were in one of his campaign offices in Russia's Ural Mountains, and a group of pro-Kremlin grannies suddenly turned up and started banging on the door, kind of calling Mr. Navalny all kinds of names. And he actually asked for the door to be opened and for them to be let in to talk to them. So, you know, they were let in, he talked to them, he calmed them down, he even managed to kind of convince them. And that was the kind of man he was. He was very good with people, very good at persuading people.
Maria Snegovaya is a senior fellow with the Europe, Russia and Eurasia programme at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies, and she joined me a short time ago to discuss this matter. Maria, thanks for being with us on BBC News. President Biden, as we heard, clearly blames President Putin for Alexei Navalny's death. The UN says the state is responsible for the death of an inmate in custody. What's your reaction to the death of Alexei Navalny, as we've heard reported by Russian authorities?
Well, like most people worldwide, who certainly support the fight for freedom in case against tyranny and autocracy, I'm extremely heartbroken to hear this news. It's not completely unexpected for most of us who closely watched Russian politics, because unfortunately, since his return back to Russia in early in 2021, Navalny essentially has become a prisoner of Putin, a hostage. And there is even rumors that an effort to exchange Navalny for other, perhaps certain people, certain Russians that the Western policymakers were attempting, were rejected on the side of the Kremlin, because probably Kremlin wanted to hold Navalny under its control and eventually destroy Navalny.
Now, he was the leading opposition figure. With his death and so many other leaders either in exile or in prison, where does that leave the opposition movement in Russia, given elections are just a month away?
Well, honestly, nobody expected that this election will be anything remotely resembling the real elections. The only candidate who was running on openly anti-war platform, Boris Nadezhdin, was just recently banned from running. It's clear that Putin feels very completely unpunished and not facing any resistance, any serious resistance. So he is getting rid of the opposition, including this horrible murder of Navalny. That is because he's feeling in control of the situation. Unfortunately, Russian opposition is in disarray. There's a lot of arguments, and most importantly, there is lack of hope, lack of this audacity of hope that Navalny was offering to many people in Russia and outside of Russia. In a lot of ways, Navalny was extremely creative, highly talented politician that Russia has never had. So in a lot of ways, he was completely unique and certainly courageous and heroic, as demonstrated by his return in Russia. And most importantly, his behavior in jail, when already imprisoned in Russia, he provided really inspirational, uplifting letters that he sent back to his supporters, which really served this source of hope. Right now, certainly, it's an extremely gloomy moment where it seems like both Russians inside of the country and and the world more broadly is just failing to contain the Russian regime, the horrible regime that unfortunately is spreading its deleterious influence outside of Russia and currently in Ukraine.
And just on that point, Maria, you know, there's been much international outcry today, but what options are there for international leaders to do more than just share those words?
Yeah, absolutely. One and most important thing right now is support Ukraine, because as we see right now, the world clearly is divided into black and white, right? There is tyranny and this fight for freedom against tyranny, but we need to help Ukraine to do this fight, to pick up where Russians domestically, the liberal, pro-liberal minded Russians have left and where they failed. Unfortunately, I think we will probably, it's time to say that. And Ukrainians right now heroically try to stop Putin, his deleterious influence, and that's why all of the world that supports freedom needs to support Ukraine. It's really heartbreaking to see the situation with Ukraine package in Congress that's been stuck in the House these days, which unfortunately has led already to Ukraine losing in Avdiivka. It's very important to counter the Kremlin. Otherwise, Putin is left with complete impunity, and when he feels completely uncontained, he does horrible things, as we have seen with Navalny's murder.
And just very, very briefly, Maria, we only have a few moments left. You mentioned Avdiivka there. How big a blow is it to the Ukrainian offensive to have withdrawn from there?
Avdiivka was strategically important for Ukraine, but it's more important what it symbolizes worldwide. Putin is committed to keep fighting, and he has a very strong cause. The West is divided and failing to pass aid to this country that is struggling to contain aggressive imperialistic Russia and the Kremlin. That is why it's extremely concerning that 2 years into this horrible war, when everybody's clear what the Putin regime represents today, we are finding ourselves in the West in this complete disarray. It's very frustrating, and I hope that we'll be able to overcome this.
Okay, Maria Snegovaya, Senior Fellow with the Europe, Russia and Eurasia Programme at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.